Good evening. Welcome everyone to the Fifth Estate at the Wheeler Centre. It's so lovely to see you all here in our new little formation tonight. I hope you're enjoying the tables and a few of you got yourselves a drink. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with Bob Carr. He's a friend of, I would say, the Fifth Estate. It's been, he's one of the few people that we've ever invited back, time and again. And it's really lovely of you to be here. He is, of course, the longest continually serving Premier in the history of New South Wales. Who was the longest not continual?
Henry Parkes.
Yeah, okay, fair.
Who we say is the father of Federation. Well,
that's nice to be in the same sort of paragraph as him, isn't it? That's yeah. And of course a former foreign minister serving under the governments of Julia Gillard and Kevin Rudd II. He's the author of numerous books, 6 books. Including Thought Lines, My Reading Life, Diary of a Foreign Minister, and his latest book, which is why we're here tonight, Bring Back Yesterday. It's a beautiful, clever book, Bob. I have to say I was somewhat... well, I can't quite find the word actually when in going to read it, that would this be something maudlin? Would this be something that was rushed in some way? But of course, it was never going to be these things because you wrote it, and it's really great book. So please give Bob a really warm Wheeler welcome.
Thank you.
This is a book about grief, but it's equally a book about friendship and companionship. And in the very few times that I saw you and Helena together, how much you loved each other was just self-evident. It was always present, and it's in this book. And there's something about the relationship that felt to me like almost childhood besties. And that may have had something to do with not having children, that you each remained the very centre of the universe for each other. You called her your little friend. Tell us about your friendship with her.
I think there's a line in Gabriel Garcia Marquez's Love in the Time of Cholera, which is largely a novel about marriage. And it goes something like this. When they'd been married for 30 years, they were part of a single being. Together, they had surmounted the challenge of the instantaneous hatred, the bursts of misunderstanding, the glories of the conjugal conspiracy, and were amazed at and were surprised by and pleased with their incredible triumph over fortune. And I think a long-term marriage has got that element in it, a long-term partnership. But it comprises, in the serenity of those last years, which are torn asunder when, in the nature of things, you lose a partner, a long-term partner, in our case 50 years, that's the end of the story, and all of a sudden your attention is drawn back to the beginning of the story. The end of a story somehow makes the beginning. And the beginning did have those elements of an alliance of kids. It's interesting you'd say that. I'd say to her, here we are, we're wandering around like 2 kids up and down the street, 6-year-olds finding adventures in the laneways and the the big trees and the sprawling trees in the backyards.
There's a playfulness.
Yeah, yeah.
It's really unusual for former politicians to spill their hearts in this way. Their guts, really, is what I feel like. You've given everything into this book, and you expose your vulnerability just as a simple matter of fact of what you've been through and what you continue to go through with that loss. I wonder, while you wrote the book, if there was a sort of internal conversation going on with Helena, if she almost that whispering in your ear that guided you to write it, or perhaps her chiding you for writing it.
Well, it certainly was a compulsion. I just had a compulsion to write it. Put it down to me being a former journalist and someone who'd written books. The unexamined life is not worth living. The notion that if you're going through something that's the biggest thing in your life, then you should record it. More specifically, just as I got some help from reading Joan Didion or Joyce Carol Oates, more recently Geraldine Brooks, and Julian Barnes on this subject. Well, I remember standing on a street corner in Vienna as she was in the Donau Clinic in the ICU with no hope of coming out a matter of time before her heart ceased to work, her brain was dead, flooded with blood. I remember thinking, in this state of shock, what is this world I'm now in? This world of bereavement, of grief. 48 hours ago, we were just wandering the streets of Vienna. She had a warm smile every time I looked at her. What is this world I'm now inhabiting? What is bereavement? I'd never thought about it. The universe is tilted. My life has been physioed into the 50 years with her since I met her at a swimming pool in Tahiti on the way back from trips to America, and into this post-Helena life, this Helena-less life. What is it? And I fell on those books. I'd add C.S. Lewis, A Grief Observed, to the list, hoping to get some notion that would make what I was going through more comprehensible. Reflected the fact that I'm a somewhat bookish person. I'd try to find, quite naturally, some notion in them. I wrote so that others would get some help. I mean, if I were to describe how, in some ways, I was partly cracked, especially in the first 6 months, that's going to be of comfort to people who think I'm out of my head as I face the shock and the second wave and the third wave of the grief at losing a lifelong partner. There's another notion answering this question, why write this? Apart from the compulsion and apart from wanting to share it in a way that might be helpful. And that is, one element of grief is a sense of panic that the person you've lost will become an historic figure. And C.S. Lewis, just to quote one of the books that I found helpful, said, he described this as being like looking at a photo of his lost partner lying in the snow, being covered in the snow, and finally him being left with not the real person he shared his life with, but an historic figure. I didn't want to lose the stories. I didn't want to lose the jokes.
The theme of memory is right through the book, and that struggle and that almost desperation to hold on to memory. And the role of memory in grief very generally is a big one, isn't it? You call it being memory struck in your book. And I think for almost everyone that experiences loss, that at first we relive again and again the moment of the loss, or for an expected, a decline with an illness, we relive the hardship of that late decline, and you feel like you're never going to remember anything else again. And an uncle told me this, who lost his only child. He said when he said it took me a long time to remember anything but the last weeks in that hospital, and that it was almost the recovery, the seeds of the recovery began when he began to have these memories of earlier times, and then in fact to remember things he hadn't thought of for years. Talk about to us about that part of memory for you, how it's played with you, I suppose, played upon you.
Well, coming down to Melbourne and staying in the Sofitel Hotel, you just think, the last time I was here, she was with me.
Yes.
What is this universe I'm in now that has been rendered not lonely, but Helena-less? What is this universe? It remains not as sharply as the first 6 months. It's a strange landscape, because for 50 years it was shared. So that's being memory struck. But I think this is probably timely to say bereavement is not the worst thing that can happen to a human being. I think of a friend of mine, political associate, who's losing her sight. I think former Deputy Premier of mine, Andrew Refshorgi, who's living with long COVID, he's aware of the depletion of his strength, the diminishment of his strength, his normal, healthy, happy state every minute of the day. A former political colleague living with Parkinson's and all the loss. He can't read, for example. He hasn't got the capacity to concentrate. Motor neurone, the slide into cognitive decline. You can manage sadness, you can manage a loss more easily than you can manage these other conditions. So I don't want to be interpreted as elevating bereavement over things that really are harder. The death of a child, you mentioned that example. I reproduce in the book a letter that I sent to a political colleague, Joel Fitzgibbon, and his wife Diane. They lost their son, mid-30s, in a parachute accident. He was serving in the Australian Army. And I thought that with what I dealt with in the previous 6 months, I could write with some insight. I said, for example, bereavement throws every aspect of your life up in the air. I said, nothing will overcome the sense of loss. You'll live it. This is now part of who you are. And I said this. I said, there wasn't a moment of the time when I was suffering Helena's loss when I wouldn't have agreed that the loss of a child would be a greater burden than the loss even of your life partner. And I was talking to a group. I was on a music tour. We were talking in a hotel, this group of Australians studying, going to concerts. And we just found that we were, at this end of the table, we were all single people who'd lost partners. And someone said that. Someone said, of course, losing a child would be even worse. And there was a gentle nodding around the table. I found that quite moving. You mentioned Verdi actually in the book, and that listening to opera was one of the things that made you want to keep living. And then you discovered that in fact he had lost, I think, a 1-year-old daughter and then an infant son and then his wife, all by the age of 27. And that everything made sense to you then about his music? Yes. Yeah, and about my sensitivity to these things, I would have read in biographies or summaries of his life, that he had lost a son, then his wife, then a daughter in the space. But in the little museum, the Verdi Museum in Busseto, in his father-in-law's house where he had lived writing operas in his earliest days, there's a little plaque in the museum, and it hit me. It just hit me. I thought, what an astonishing burden to bear within the space of 2 or 3 years. What an astonishing burden. And then I recollected the emotion of his a concentrated emotion of operas. One that occurred to me was Forza del Destino, which Helena and I had seen performed a week or so before she died. And you can hear in that music someone who knew suffering. There's another corner of the museum with a quote from, I think, an Italian newspaper on his death in 1900. He loved for us, he cried for us. And that's how Italians regarded him, with the fabulous riches of his music in their souls.
Another activity that you've did a lot of was walking, and I was very moved by your descriptions of walking the streets of Sydney. It sounds like you were in a completely altered state, walking miles and miles. And you write about obsessive walking as a form of madness, but remorseless sanity too. There came a time when I had walked enough and so I stopped. I loved that sentence. There came a time when I had walked enough and so I stopped. Do you remember that? Was it a conscious moment?
Yeah, well, Achilles tendon injury and the blisters that wouldn't repair were part of it. But I'd be at a dinner with friends who were doing the right thing, taking me out and distracting me when I was in the acute phase of just after her death, and I didn't want to head home straight away. So I walked sometimes for 3 hours, and it was late at night, the city was deserted, and you can do it and not be noticed. I could have been a criminal whose poster was on every billboard, and no one would have pointed and said, there the malefactor is. You can walk vast distances at night through near deserted city streets. The only people who notice you would be a pair of lovers, arm in arm, and they're not going to concentrate for a second on an old man who's walking along, reliving his eulogy in St Mary's Cathedral and thinking how he might have improved it, or composing a letter to her in his mind. But Barry Humphrey's widow, Lizzie Spender, who I met by chance at a social gathering, I went up. She was out here sorting out their affairs after his death. And I went up to her and I said, I've lost my wife. What clues have you got about this bereavement business? I'm trying to make sense of it. And she's the one who said to me, it'll throw every aspect of your life up in the air. And she said the other thing is, you do whatever's required to survive this. And she gave 3 examples. They're scrubbed from my memory, but I think one of them, totally inapplicable to my circumstances, was binge shopping. She said, she might have used it as an absurd example. She just said, you do whatever you can to survive. And for me, it happened to be these manic long walks late at night. It was a way of communing with her spirit, indulging in memory, and seemed to do no great harm to me or anyone else, and was an alternative to reaching for medication. Drugs just don't work for me. Even sleeping tablets, I'm immunised to the appeal appeal of drugs. They just don't take off for me. And binge drinking wouldn't have worked. And remorseless walking, which I later learned is a response of people who've been through stress, post-traumatic stress response, seemed to have fitted the bill. But the thing is, you do whatever is required to keep your grip on reality.
In our modern world, we've set aside a lot of the traditions, I suppose, of mourning that humans always had in various ways in different cultures. Did you feel, we'll talk about friendship separately because that's a different thing, but other, I suppose, structures of support that are there for the man who's lost his beloved wife of 50 years or for whoever it is. Are there any structures there for us?
No, I would have plunged into any support group because the freakish thing about the person in bereavement, and you are a pest, you do become a pest because there is one thing up there in your prefrontal cortex that your closest companion in life's journey with you for 50 years has now been obliterated. And, you know, Auden's poem, Funeral Blues, you know, pull down the moon, dismantle the sun. Nothing else matters. Why is ordinary life going on? And you can't talk about it.
And all you want to do is talk about it.
All you want to do is talk about it because it's the biggest thing there. And you talk about it inappropriately. And I quote some examples of that. C.S. Lewis in his book says the bereaved people should be isolated, implies like lepers on islands to keep them from being such pests. You do talk about it inappropriately because you must. It's the one big thing in your head. And wise friends allow that to happen.
It becomes understandable why many cultures there is clothing that will identify you as somebody in grief for a period of time.
Well, my hero, Franklin Roosevelt, after the death of his mother, Sarah, as President of the United States, wore a black armband. I think these were I think she died late 30s, early 40s. It might have been the war years. And he still distinguished himself with that black armband for his mother.
I read a piece and I tried to find it for our conversation tonight. It was a couple of months ago and it had a real impact on me. And I can't even remember where I read it. It was perhaps the Times or it was a newspaper. A woman who, again, had lost a child. And she wrote that the worst thing that anybody could say to her was, I can't imagine what you're going through. And she said that so many people would say that, I can't imagine what you're going through. And she said every time she heard those words, what she was hearing was that it's so unimaginable that human beings, as the most imaginative creatures on earth, you can't even imagine it. And I was really struck by that because we can imagine. I've never been happily married, well, for even 5 years, let alone 50. I have an active imagination that does allow me to imagine the grief that you have been through. And likewise for this woman who wrote this piece, there is a resistance in human beings to want to imagine it.
Oh yes, I so many times in my life, I possessed the idea for a minute of what it would be like to lose a partner. I mentioned a funeral I attended for my old voice coach for her husband, and she came into this little Anglican church, 19th century Anglican church, stone church, and Gina was was keening, and the wail filled it. And nothing challenges you like that sort of grief. I remember a deceased politician, Paul Lander, and his wife on the edge of the grave as he's being lowered into the graves, crying, "Goodbye, my friend, my only friend." And these things, like the wailing of my old voice coach at the death of a husband in that church, really challenges. And I write in the book, I describe it because I got a little tribute to her. I say, I possess the idea of her suffering, bereavement, the loss of her husband for a second, and just like a pitcher throwing a ball that they've caught immediately. I threw it out of my mind. But looking back on that incident in that church, me being discomforted by the hyperbole, what I saw as the hyperbole, the exaggeration of Gina's grief, I imagine, looking back on that, I imagine Mephistopheles behind one of the columns of the church saying, "Fast move, Bob, but when I'm ready one day, I'm going to come from you and we see how you'll handle this." Joan Didion plays with the same concept. If I can just show how I've mastered the entire literature of grief.
Yes.
Sally. She recalls in her book that as a young literary critic, she picked up the memoir of Dylan Thomas's wife, Catelyn, which is called The Leftover Life. And she thought this is about grief. It's what we now call a grief memoir, and my book's a contribution to this genre. But she found it distasteful and put it down. Now in her grief, decades later, in her book, Year of Magical Thinking, she considers how she scorned the grief of that widow all those years ago when she was younger and considered herself smarter. And she quotes these lines from a poet: "Time is the fire in which we burn. Time is the school in which we learn."
Helena herself was funny about death, wasn't she?
Yeah, it must have been part of a Chinese superstition in Mecca. As I describe a background, fascinating background out of Malaysia, this Chinese Indian culture. But I think the Chinese influence on her psyche was the more pronounced. And she did not want to talk about death, not for a moment. If I'd proposed that we might talk about how we would survive if the other went, she would have closed the conversation immediately. And I did detect, she won't mind me telling this, I did fear that she was never getting herself breast tested. And she said, "Yeah, I've had it done." But I checked with the GP, and it was the woman GP in the practice, and she would have done it. She said no. She looked at the record. She didn't have it done. I had to have stage a major argument. Iran and the United States was nothing compared to this showdown about the need to make out a will, and I just had to win it. You know, I said, we're just leaving a mess to our relatives. We're now in our 70s. It's just a sensible precaution. But it was some Chinese-derived popular superstition that suggested if you talk about it, you contemplate it, then you bring it closer. I had the opposite view. And I remember the day before she died, we were in the Leopold Museum in Vienna, which is devoted to secessionist art, and there was a painting by Egon Schiele. And on the plaque next to it quoted him saying, "Death resides in all living things." And, you know, I wrote that on the ticket, the museum entrance ticket. And the notion must have been, in my mind, that if you face up to it, as a memento mori, you ward it off. And yet, at that time, she had a little over 24 hours to live. She'd die the next night. But she would she would never have approved of me recording a view of death like that. She would have thought that's negative thinking. You don't think about that.
It's incredible, that story that you wrote that down. I found it actually. You've just reminded me that you keep that ticket in a little box with Helena's phone and her iPad, and was it her blood pressure?
Yeah, the only warning of an aneurysm was the fact that she had somewhat high blood pressure.
Yeah.
She was being tested for it. The doctor tells me, because Helena would never have discussed it with me. Again, that distaste for talking about grim subjects. The blood pressure might have contributed to that aneurysm in the brain. Mm. But I would say that couples might consider doing what we never did, and that's talk candidly about handling the other one going. What practical things would you need to have in place? Remember the advice I had from Lizzie Spender, Barry Humphrey's widow. This will throw every aspect of your life up in the air. Mm. To the extent you can, you might just find time to think about it and talk about it. It might clarify for you some life decisions that are going to have to be made. Mm. On the other hand, nothing prepares you for the awful blow.
No, and the circumstances, which for you were really, I mean, to be on the other side of the world in such a moment. I mean, perhaps it wouldn't have made any difference. I don't know. You could have been on the moon, probably.
No,
couldn't you?
I don't think it would have. And,
yeah.
It was almost. I've got to say this: our last 24 hours could have been produced by some director in heaven.
Yeah, well, there's a bit of the Verdi about it, isn't there?
Yeah, saying you two have got 24 hours together, but you will have an idyllic day.
Yeah,
you'll walk around Vienna under a autumn sky. There's still a hint of summer warmth in the atmosphere. There'll be a public holiday, so some of those streets with the beautiful apartment houses will be empty. You'll have it to yourself. You'll have fun finding a quirky opera cafe. She at one end of the street, you at the other, peering around the corner, and then she waving. She's found Peter's Opera Cafe.
It's that childlike play.
Behaving like kids on an excursion. And then I'll never forget it. After lunch with a couple of Australian friends, I went to do a workout in a city gym, and when I came down to the foyer after the statutory hour, she was sitting there on a couch, and she saw me, and she gave me the warmest smile. The smile said, "We've been apart for an hour, now we're back again to continue our walking like kids, exploring." And the smile said something else as well. It said to me, looking back on it, and I'm not exaggerating, it was a very warm smile just at being thrown together again after an hour apart. It said, "Here we are in our 70s, and you and I know, Robert, that the biggest concern each of us has at this stage in our life, all the battles won, no distractions, is that the other in this partnership be happy and secure." And I'm sure there are people in this audience, if there are people here of a certain age, who know that sense, that after being together for so long, the distractions are out of the way, you're left with the pared down life that says, this is wonderful, we've got this time together, how long might it last? But you are behaving and I'm behaving as if the only thing of crucial importance is that the other one be happy and secure. And then, I suppose, when Helena gave me that greeting at 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, when we got together again, after I'd done the workout and we were going off to the streets to walk around, trying to find a box office, I think, to get tickets to Verdi's Requiem, as it happens, she had, 6 hours to live. It is a book about time and memory, about the teasings of time, the paradoxes of time. It was astute of you to say that, because I speculate that in 1979, when I tracked down a voice instructor, Gina Pirro, who made a big difference in my life. She'd been recommended in a theatre program. I read about her in a Nimrod theatre program, and I thought, I'm waiting to get a seat in Parliament. I'm working as a journalist at the Bulletin. I'll see if she'll give me lessons. I knock on a door, having made the appointment. And she comes to the door. She's a woman living with polio. She speaks in a cut-glass accent. She's from a working-class background in the north of England, but her mother said to her, Gina, you've got polio, but this is not going to stop you. She became one of the top voice teachers in the world, and the top one in Australia, as it happens, giving Mel Gibson a Scottish accent if he was required to get it, a voice coach, an accent coach. But I have this notion that there's a tendril connecting that first meeting on a doorstep in 1979, all the years on, when I've got to give the eulogy for Helena in St Mary's Cathedral, a difficult acoustic, and make it the speech of my life. And all the tricks she taught me about resonance, modulation, projecting your voice to the back of a theatre or a hall, all of them were required if they were to hear me in the shocking acoustics of a neo-Gothic cathedral. There's just a tendril, a link between that first meeting with Gina and she, now dead, having given me the tricks of the trade I needed to give Helena that speech.
I loved that tribute. It was. There's a few of them in there. It's interesting that you're only really singling out those people with the links over time. So I have no doubt that you have friends that were there for you in this, and nothing like a former Premier of New South Wales to know who his friends are.
Some say there are no friends in politics.
Well, it turns out there are, right?
I'd quickly reject that.
Yes,
there are friends.
Yes.
And there is a wonderful warmth.
Yes.
Among people who've been through political battles together, who've been down in the polls and who've come together and shown loyalty to one another and triumphed in the end politically.
I want to get back a bit to that. What you talk about. You changed, but you're more sensitive to other people's grief and suffering in that state. One of the countless things you've lost is the person who you probably talk to the very most about the world and the state of the world. Does this change the way you see the world?
I think it does in one big thing. You're inevitably more sensitive about the sufferings of battered humanity. And when I read the other day that 750,000 people have lost their houses in Lebanon, that terrifies me. The death of those schoolgirls in the bombing in Iran the other day, you think of the wailing anguish of their parents, little girls at a school, and then what appears to be a war crime, a gratuitous moment. And when Hegseth, for that matter, the people in the Ayatollah's camp, talk so casually about mass slaughter from the skies destroying our enemies, you know the great truth. It means dead schoolgirls and ordinary, desperate, poor people who've lost the few possessions they own, particularly a farmhouse or an apartment block, and are just, with all they can carry on their backs, trying to escape the bombardment. That's what it boils down to. And yes, I think if you've had a bereavement, your antenna is more acute.
Grieving and mourning obviously can be very political. There are revolutions in history that have begun at funerals. And even right now, the death of the Ayatollah is being mourned by millions of Iranians. The slaughter of Israelis on October 7th, the obliteration of Gaza, the massacre at Bondi Beach. There is so much collective grief right now in the world. And the passion of that grief can be very volatile. If there's a reason not to contain grief, it can very quickly turn violent. How can we contain the grief in the world right now?
I've got to say, as someone who's a card-carrying atheist, that one virtue of religion is when it channels that, it contains that. Remember when the right-wing American agitator, just reaching for his name...
Charlie Kirk.
Yeah, Charlie Kirk was assassinated in what could well be the foretaste of political violence in the United States. I'm still sort of half braced for the right-wing response to that, taking out a left-wing figure. Remember that exceptional expression his widow gave in forgiving the perpetrator of the crime. Well, that was done in the context of a funeral. And I think religious faith, you find in all creeds some compulsion to set aside the violence. And people have got a great capacity to do that. You can take any example from history, but the slaughter of children, I think, tests the capacity of people to absorb and, if not forgive, to somehow move on. I think of the battle over segregation in the United States, don't we? I've used the Kirk comparison, but remember the bombing of the church and the death of those schoolgirls in Birmingham, Alabama. And there's now a civil rights museum on the site of that church. But how anyone can forgive the slaughter of children in war and political conflict, I don't know.
What do you make of the state of the world right now, Bob?
Well, wars between great states, back on the agenda when we deluded ourselves a decade ago that we had moved beyond that. There was a hint of optimism that wars were becoming things of the past. But now that's altered. And the great state ambitions, Putin's desire to remake the power of the Soviet Union, the Russian Empire, that revanchist instinct, wanting to be a Peter the Great or a Catherine the Great and expand the boundaries of Russia. That's an old-fashioned, entirely old-fashioned ambition about expanding national borders, when we thought, in Europe at least, that humankind had got over that instinct. And there are structures of cooperation between states, almost a European identity. The statecraft that was required from the West, given its triumphant victory in the Cold War with the Soviet Union, was badly lacking. Not to incorporate the defeated empire and realising how traumatised Russia had been by the loss of Ukraine, and providing a European-wide security umbrella to bring Russia in when it was still possible, before the assumption of power by this former KGB agent, an ultimate Russian nationalist.
It just occurs to me that your marriage sort of coincided with the most hopeful period of human history, and ended in a way alongside the time. I think a lot of that hope for many people. I mean, I sound very, very bleak, don't I, about the future of democracy, but I am very bleak about it, actually. I feel like it's hugely threatened.
There are a lot of indicators that are very worrying. For example, the retreat of the implied prohibition on even thinking about nuclear weapons use. Something the Economist magazine discussed a few years ago. The shrinking of that implicit assumption, we'll never touch nuclear weapons. Now, it might just be rhetorical, Russia pushing forward a few mad commentators to keep the West unbalanced, but that's a very, very disturbing possibility that I was talking to someone the other day about the prospect of a naval clash between China and the United States, South China Sea or Taiwan Strait. And if the Chinese, because of strength in cyber and the strength of their special missiles, supersonic missiles, were to sink one of those American aircraft carriers, like the two of them devastating Iran at the present time, could you rule out that a US president would not make a decision to deploy first use nuclear weapons strike against China, especially a weak US president under attack for having on his or her watch one or two American aircraft carriers go to the bottom of the ocean? So, and here's another thought. Where's the peace movement when you wanted them so much? Now with the threat of war, catastrophic war, worse than it's been at any time in recent memory, there are no people marching for peace.
Yeah, it's strange, isn't it, the way protest movements and social movements have become very single issue almost. I think that's a great question as to where they've gone. Do you think would it be a good time to be foreign minister, or do you think you got a better time?
I think it'd be a great time to be foreign minister, especially one with a bit of experience, 5 years experience in the job, to be saying Australia. Put this down to I had lunch with Gareth Evans today, but Australia can be a creative middle power. Let's revive that notion. The Cambodian peace accords and the Cambodian peace process and the Cambodian peace accords arose from Australian diplomacy. Why aren't we, even behind closed doors, promoting in Asia the idea of a détente between the rising power, China, and the prevailing power,
the United States? Why aren't we?
Well, maybe it's a failure of imagination, but you saw the response that Carney's speech got, the Prime Minister of Canada. A middle power, I think, can be listened to more when the United States has incapacitated itself through shockingly bad political leadership. The West Europeans would be open to a message from Canada, from Australia, about new ways of thinking of some of these problems.
We seem a long way from being able to do that. You know, I was going through your Foreign Affairs diaries a few days ago, and you know, you in that book you question whether, with its current structure, the ALP had a long-term future. And not just the ALP, probably all the parties in Australia that have an insistence on having to vote the way the party says, and all the various things that sort of hamstring honesty. Do you think given the sort of indicators around the rest of the world, that Australian democracy can hold up to the pressures that seem to be undoing others?
We should flatter ourselves. Our system seems to be more resilient. Compulsory voting, we've got a checklist, compulsory voting, preferential voting.
Good electoral commission.
Yeah, absolutely. Good electoral commission, unlike the United States. And above all, that precious thing, the ethos of Australian politics. You use an election, you lose an election, and you order in the packing cases. I've been in 2 governments, a state government, 88, and a federal government, 2013, that have lost power. We accept the people's verdict. It's a precious thing. It's a convention. So I think we can be proud of that. The worst thing is Pauline Hanson saying there are no good Muslims. Well, where did this stupid notion come from? I did a tour of Sydney water facilities in the western suburbs recently. I'm on the board of Sydney Water, and at one water filtration plant, I'm having a consultation with 15 staff. 4 or 5 of them happen to be. They explained this. They weren't having a bread roll or having a glass of water because it was Ramadan. That's not a threat to anyone. Them observing their religion, and their colleagues simply noted it. This is the spirit we ought to have. I said to a young Islamic couple, I was helping them get the visa for the wife, a doctor. She's coming into this country. She wears a hijab. And I said to her husband, who's working in the building trade, while he completes a degree in engineering, civil engineering, I said, Furkand, how's your wife liking Australia? He said, boss, of course she likes Australia. What's there not to like about Australia? And I heard someone with an Islamic background, I think it was someone with Indian subcontinent Islamic background, say recently, and I took it as a great compliment to this country, that Australia is the best country for non-white people to come to of the European countries, European-derived countries in the world. I thought, well, that is flattering. And in the book,
there's a great story of Helena, the way she was accepted by your parents. I love that you write your dad, who was a train driver, sort of rhetorical white Australia supporter.
Yeah.
And on the first meeting of this young half
Chinese
Indian, half Chinese, just fell in love with her. That was it. You know, she was in. And
yeah, talk about race. I say for a time race was everything in Australia. I at university was a supporter of white Australia.
Yeah.
I agreed with Robert Menzies when he said, there's a TV interview you can see of Menzies on YouTube, and the question was obviously, do you think, Prime Minister, that we'll hold on to white Australia for long? And Menzies says, beautiful side, he said, the most sincere thing Menzies said, you could see he believed it. He said, I certainly hope so. He said, when you see what's happening in other countries, even in the United Kingdom, the conflict between races, I hope we retain our homogeneity in this land. And that was the conventional opinion. And Arthur Calwell, the Labor leader, held that view, but with even more ferocious rhetoric. But with ferocious rhetoric, Menzies' rhetoric wasn't ferocious at all. That was a conventional wisdom. But Helena comes here, chooses to come here for a last year of school in 1965, writing to a convent in Western Sydney and being accepted by the Mother Superior without knowing a person here. And she got a taxi from the airport to this boarding, a very brave thing to do, not a person here who she knows. And she was received, and a nun said, you might like to have a rest and get some sleep, so took her to a bed in the dormitory. And when Helena woke up, the bed was surrounded by these Australian girls, all beaming, to welcome her to the school. This dark-skinned girl with Chinese nose and dark Indian eyes, speaks Hokkien, a grandmother with bound feet out of Qing Dynasty China. she receives a warm welcome into Australia. And I say in the book that there are times I love my country very much. And it's the way we allowed that racism just to slip away. Within years, it just went. It just went. And one symbol of it was in the Fibro house at Matraville. My train driver, Dad, who'd been a rhetorical supporter of white Australia, meeting Helena, and yes, as you put it, as I conveyed in the book, falling in love with her. Race once meant so much, and then it meant nothing. Just one other example from the book of that principle. Helena's old grandmother with the bound feet wearing the tunic, when she heard that Helena's mother was marrying an Indian, she disowned her. Helena said if her grandfather had still been alive, he would have killed her. The racism from the Chinese, the sense of racial distinctiveness of old China ran very strong. But when the old woman was asked to look after the oldest daughter for a time, this toddler, this old Chinese chauvinist shuffling around with the bound feet on the rubber holding just outside Taiping, fell in love with her, the product of a mixed marriage. Race sometimes is so important, and then we understand it means nothing.
See, the bit of the story that is difficult for today is the bit where you say, when I was at university, I was a supporter of the White Australia policy. If you were trying to get elected today, if this was anybody now who had changed their mind, you'd be cancelled immediately. You'd be cancelled immediately if that was dug up about you while you were, we've lost, the capacity for nuance seems to be very lost, and we see it in, I think, things like the writers' festivals imploding. I wrote it down. There was a great quote from Nick Cave. He's another one who writes about grief very beautifully. And he wrote very recently about the furore around the Adelaide Writers' Week. It was happening while I was on tour in Australia. In an almost cosmic display of stupidity, that entire event was vaporised in a mushroom cloud of cowardice, performative outrage, self-righteous posturing, cancellations, counter-cancellations, mob trots, and general narcissistic silliness. Political art, taken to its extreme, became no art at all, as Australia's longest-running literary festival collapsed under a mass walkout, being sucked down the sinkhole of a single monolithic ideology. One voice, one cause, one dissent. I was very taken by that, that there's no room anymore to say, well, I might acknowledge the problem but have a different way of wanting to solve it. Or I might agree with this part of it but not that part of it. And, something like we can't have a past of any kind. We can't have ever made a mistake. And we certainly can't express honesty about confusion.
I think the strongest part of what you said is the capacity to be able to say, I agree with that part of your proposition, but not that. That sort of subtlety and that sort of nuance. So I could imagine the controversial writer, Randa, I just forget her second name.
Abdul Fattah.
Yeah, Abdul
Fattah.
Yeah, Fattah. Being part of a panel with someone who supported Israel, maybe from the Jewish community. If I'd been part of the panel, someone who'd expressed views on this, I would have said to her, for example, I understand your outrage at what is happening in Gaza, but can I put to you that it's not useful to say something about no safe spaces for Zionists, that that's not helpful and it can be interpreted in the following way. Why not avoid that and focus on the areas where Israel's ethno-nationalism is so very vulnerable? The spread of settlements, all of them illegal under international law, the war crimes in Gaza, the occupation of Arab lands that has gone on since 1967. Do you think, I would have said this to Randa, do you think that what appeared to be on your part some praise for the Hamas attack of October the 6th was really something that that helps the hardliners in Israel? Why don't we stick to a script here that helps the Palestinians and helps those Israelis who might crave for the notion of a two-state solution, even though that seems to be slipping away? So, I mean, why not have a discussion like that? It might have been a better path for the organisers of the festival to have accommodated Randa within a panel with a defender of Israel, perhaps a left-wing defender of Israel, and someone who'd have criticisms of both sides.
There are so many ways. With nuance, with that these things could be done. But I suppose my point is more the overreactive, explosive kind of response, particularly in the arts, particularly in writers' festivals. And it was interesting to me because you've been very clear about your position on Netanyahu and the Israeli government, but you're also one of the only people who said, I'm still up for the festival. There's a microphone, I'll sit down and I will speak. And our time, is up already, Bob. It's gone very, very fast. It's been really great to talk to you. Your insights, your gifts, your courage. When you write a book and you hand it over to your publisher and you're really living in the book, but there's a gap of time before that book comes back in boxes. And I thought of you with that process, and I thought, I wonder if he really wants to talk about it now, whether there's been a shift in him of where he's, sort of sitting with that. So
I understand that, but the notion, the idea that the book might be helpful, that someone who reads it might face the loss of their partner a month after reading it, and would know that there are attempts to map grief and to analyse it and find that helpful. If someone else has gone through it and says, it's not the worst thing that can happen to a human being, and it does boil down to a huge nostalgic yearning to, yes, bring back yesterday. But if it is the leftover life that you're living, there's a realism about accepting that. It won't be as good as the life you've had, but it's still a life and it'll have many precious things in it.
All the best with you. This book, it's not just, I think it does something even well beyond helping people that have been through something perhaps similar to you. It's a beautiful book of humanity, and it can really take its place amongst some other great books on this topic. So thank you all for coming along tonight. And there are copies of Bob's book down the back, Ramona Bookshop. Thank you so much for being here this evening. I wish you all a safe journey home, and once again, can we thank Bob Carr?
Thank you.